Hello, and welcome to the Church of Christ Bible Study Rewind, where we look back at what we studied in the former class from last Sunday. In this class, we finished chapter 8 of Deuteronomy. We'll be finishing chapter 8 of Deuteronomy. If you are wondering what we've already studied in the book of Deuteronomy, we have all the lessons and all the things we've studied up until this point in our Facebook page and at our YouTube site as well. It includes an overview of the entire book if you want to get in on that and kind of understand what the book, why the book is written, what it's for, and how historically where it sets in the Bible. So chapter 8, the first part of chapter 8, God is speaking through Moses and reminding them how he has humbled his people. He's reminding them that everything comes from him. That's his main message throughout this book. Actually, that's pretty much the main message throughout the entire Bible. But in this context, God's people are specifically the Israelites, and he's specifically dealing with them with a specific covenant, not the same covenant we currently have as Christians with Jesus the Christ, but rather something that had more to do with laws and how to act among the world. Idolatry was forbidden. All those things were current during that day. And those are the things that Moses is looking to reiterate before they go and take the land for themselves. So we are going to be starting in verse 6 of chapter 8. And I think we're going to go ahead and we're just going to read through verse 13. 6 through 13. And you shall keep all the commandments of Jehovah your God, to walk in his ways, and to fear him. For Jehovah your God brings you into a good land, a land of streams of water, of fountains and depths that spring out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land in which you shall eat bread without want. You shall not lack anything in it, a land whose stones are iron, and you shall dig copper out of its mountains. And you shall eat and be satisfied, and you shall bless Jehovah your God in the good land which he has given you. Take heed to yourself, lest you forget Jehovah your God, so as not to keep his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes, which I am commanding you today, that when you have eaten and are satisfied, and have built goodly houses and have lived in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and your gold have multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied. He's building this crescendo to the next statement. But the writer of this booklet has stopped it there. So here's this crescendo statement. Here's all these good things going on with you these things will happen for you in the new land. So what does God promise if they obey? And I'm going to go over my answers first, and then I'm going to reiterate what was said in class by other students. So there's this basic increase of wealth is what's been promised to them, right? I mean, water and land, and you're not going to you'll be able to eat and not ever need any. You're not going to be hungry, basically, is what it sounds like. The increase of wealth should be associated with a spirit of thanksgiving. And that was something that I thought was especially important. They shall bless Jehovah. And that word bless just simply means kneel. When you get these things, remember to kneel before God. Remember to thank God. Remember, he just told them, God made you humble in the land and let you know that everything's coming from him. So when these things do come, kneel before God and thank him. That is one of his main messages. God is not a tyrant, just looking to control his people. He is the one bringing the blessings and prosperity. He is a loving father in this sense. Not unlike how we understand him today as Christians. Okay, so verses 14 through, I think it's, let's see, 14 through 20. Then, when it rises up in your heart, so all these good things happen for you, then when it rises up in your heart, and you forget Jehovah your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slaves, who led you through the great and dreadful wilderness with burning serpent and scorpion and thirsty ground where no water is, who brought you water out of flinty rock, who made you eat manna in the wilderness, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and that he might prove you to do good at your latter end, that you say not in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. So there's this progression that God is describing that mankind practices all the time. You're going to get all this good stuff, and you're going to forget about me and say you did it. That's not unusual. We see that happening even today. But you shall remember Jehovah your God, for it is he who gives to you power to get wealth, that he might establish his covenant, which he swore to his fathers, as it is this day. And it shall be, if you forget Jehovah your God and walk after the gods and serve them and worship them, I testify you against you today that you will perish. And we'll get into that part in a minute. So the question that Brent asks is, what was the warning to the people once God blesses them, and why does prosperity cause us to forget God? Now, I'm glad he asked it in that sense, because this isn't just a conviction against the Israelites. This is something that mankind in general has a problem with continually. We talked a little bit last week about people making the gospel of Jesus, turning it into this gospel of physical prosperity, which God never did. He never promised that. And this is something that we seem to kind of forget, that this is something spiritual that God is giving us. And for them, this was about the land. But his message to them was, don't forget who's giving this to you. And why does prosperity cause people to forget? And what heart issues do we have in these cases? I'm glad he questioned it like that. So that statement, my power and my might and my hand have gotten me this wealth, is where people end up going so many times when they lose their focus on God. And that's the issue, is losing focus on God. When they no longer kneel, they no longer are thankful. And that is, it's seemingly rampant even in our society today, where we just are always wanting more and more and more. And there just seems to be a lack of focus on where these blessings come from. It seems like a common practice that people don't even pray at their meals, which, I wouldn't judge anybody on that, but certainly we've kind of lost that. It's not an art, it's just a discipline, the discipline of staying connected to God. We see this example throughout the Old Testament. It happens with kings who begin to feel a sense of power because of God's blessings. I iterated at the beginning of the class that King Nebuchadnezzar did this. Even though he saw God's great power and he recognized God, he still ended up doing that same thing. He looked at his great kingdom and said, look what I've gotten. And God turned him into an animal basically after that. And you should read that story in Daniel sometime. Others simply saw God as just another god or superstition. In every case, it is the arrogant position of a person takes when they either do not know God or they feel emboldened to accuse God using their own reasoning. And I put it that way because we see that even today. People are constantly accusing God today, and they have no idea who God is. And are really, it's embarrassing to me to watch people do this, especially when they are really held up in high regard by many other people, and they really are just acting kind of foolishly because they have no idea what they're even talking about. These examples never ended well, and for the people who lacked the proper humility towards the blessing, towards the source of their blessings. Even David faltered with some of this when he wanted to take a census, and it's just something that mankind needs to fight continually. And in the Christian world, at least in the Church of Christ, in the churches of Christ, every week we examine ourselves. We all come together and we take the Lord's Supper so that we can remind one another and remind ourselves our position before God, and that Jesus died on the cross because of me and for me. And you say that about yourself. He died for you and because of you. And that puts us in the proper perspective every week. And we do that. I would imagine that most Christians that I know practice this sort of discipline every day. When we pray to God, when we pray to our God, we humble ourselves before Him, because that's what God is telling these people here, and it's never changed. You need to not forget about me and where everything good comes from. Okay, so what will happen if the people do not heed this warning about forgetting God? And this is what it says. If you forget and walk after the other gods and serve them and worship them, I testify against you today that perishing, you will perish as the nations that Jehovah makes to perish before you. So you shall perish, because you did not listen to the voice of Jehovah your God. So what will happen? Well, if and when they get to this point, because they do eventually get to this point, and the main point there is that it's within man's inability to practice this discipline that he can go off the rails, and you will perish. He's telling them specifically, and this was part of the covenant. Look, if you go after other gods, you just like what's going to happen right now, right? Well, what's going to happen right now is you're going to go in and you're going to take over these nations. If you go after other gods, other nations will take over you, and that's what happened. And that's the main point. It indicated that God would see them just as another sinful nation. And there are phrases in the scriptures where it talks about God giving them over. In other words, He gives up on them. He has to detach Himself from that association, because they had detached their association many, many, many years before that. God is long-suffering. It's appropriate there to say something like that. And my main point was just go against God long enough and He will let you go. And you see that in the scriptures later with the prophets, that God, we want to just see God as this angry God, but God illustrated His relationship with Israel like somebody who's married. That's how deeply He felt about it. And we tend to just see God as, impervious to everything. Well, He's been hurt by that sort of rejection. And it's really something that the Christian today understands even more than any time. Because Jesus hung on the cross. Okay. Which I just want to iterate this one thing. Once God gives you over, it's not. People tend to believe that okay, now I'm not ruled by anything. It's not true. Now you're ruled by something else. It may not be Jehovah God, but it will be something else. Maybe it's just your sin. Maybe it's your own set of standards, man's own sets of morals, under which you will not even know what is going to happen in your life from one day to the next, as far as having a standard by which to live, because it's a moving target, and we see that happening today. Okay, so that's basically the last part of chapter 8, and these were some of the comments from the other students in the class. God gave them everything they needed and more. And one of the students really brought up the point about God giving them water, and what a big deal that is. For us, we just turn on a water spigot in our house and we get water. We just open the valve and there it is. And it's difficult to understand if you're not a person who had to go to a well to get water, what a big deal that is. It was a big deal for them. God also supplied them with their spiritual needs completely, and their physical needs he made available. But he was testing them to have them understand that they needed to grow spiritually. That's what God was really looking for. I talk about faith a lot. That's a spiritual growth that God is looking for in us. Another student said, obedience shows our honor to God. If we're not obeying God, we're not honoring God. It reveals our care for God. And in our care, that is where once we have that caring for God and we are obedient because we care about God and his perfect example that we try to emulate, that's our growth towards spirituality and the practice of spiritual things. And that I just want to say this really quick. The practice of spiritual things is not some kind of goofy, crazy, mystical thing. It's very simple things like being kind and being patient and honoring your father and mother and being respectful towards people. That's living spiritually, not carnally. That was something we covered in Romans. We are tested, and they were being tested to reveal their heart, because that is what God is after. He's after our hearts. What a wonderful thing to think of. What a wonderful Father we have. We can easily forget, and so God was reminding them, and he's reminding them throughout this entire book. He is the giver of good things, and blessings flow from him. And today we have his word, the ultimate blessing that we could ever ask for. It is a treasure for the Christian to be able to have his word. God knows us and our weaknesses, and that's why he warns us. He's just not like I say, he's not some tyrannical father. He's trying to warn us about the things that will impact our lives negatively. That's the love of God right there. In the next section, there comes a point when we can forget God and we end up giving ourselves glory. That's just a big issue with people in general. Pride will send people off track, and failure will result if we don't stay thankful. Society today celebrates success and individuality, and there's nothing wrong intrinsically with either one of those things. But when we separate ourselves from God, when we do that, we haven't done anything good. Big deal. If if our standard isn't set on God and it's only set on ourselves, and all we care about is ourselves and who we are and who we're becoming, and not how we are impacting our communities and our families or churches or wherever we are, at work, wherever, we've lost the plot. We can miss the mark by separating from God. They soon forget they had nothing in Egypt, and everything was given to them. God had to remind them that they will be on their own, and even with that, they forgot. So there's all these things going on that contributed to the issues that end up happening with Israel. Like them, we can reason that we deserve something owed, and it is no longer a gift from God. We nullify the gift from God when we take pride and forget to make sure that God is at the top of thankfulness for what we have. And we say, look what I did, look what I built, and don't give God the credit first. God gives us strength, and he gives us intellect, and he gives us ability. But the only reason we get any good thing, and this is one of the main things that came out of all of this, it's because of God. And that needs to be at the top of our thinking and the way we see the world and the way we act toward the world. Okay, to wrap it up, these warnings have not gone away. They are still relevant today. And this is something we kind of just end up saying every week. These things really haven't changed. Even though they are part of the old covenant, these kinds of things haven't changed. There is a choice. They either serve God or not. There's no in between. There's no, there's no saying, well, I don't want to serve God, but I'm going to be good, and so it won't matter. It does not need to be an idol necessarily, or a god. If we do not serve God, we serve some sort of idolatry. And this is something that the world doesn't see. They think, look, I don't believe in any God. I'm not superstitious. You might believe in God. What do you also believe in the Easter Bunny? They make fun of Christians, but you watch these same people who don't believe in any God, and you see that they have such great faith in other things. And for some reason, they feel the need to bash Christians over the head with their own beliefs. And you see that the systems under which they live are really just more man-made religions. The message was to the generation that saw. The message was to the generation that saw their parents fall because they forgot God. So this message was for them, and indicates a certain level of immaturity of the people. So that was it. That wrapped up chapter 9. We're going to get in chapter 8, and we're going to get into chapter 9. And I did just challenge everybody, when you read chapter 9, to understand and that even though this generation has virtually none of the people who were too afraid to go into the land, that generation died off. That's why they spent over 38 years wandering around after that. Even though none of those people are there, the accusations are against them are against this generation. And God really comes down pretty tough on them with some very strong language. And he's doing it to tell them straight up, honestly, about them. And if there's any one big message about that sometimes those are the kinds of things we all just need to hear at some point. So that's the message. And this Sunday we'll be getting into chapter 9. Unfortunately, we will not have services because of the COVID restrictions. This is November 2020. This video will be put up, and I don't know how long it'll be up there. But these are the days of the COVID restrictions, so we are not able to meet. We will, however, have class on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock through a private invitation if you're on the email list for Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. And then Danny will still carry on his classes on Wednesday night at 7 o'clock through Zoom. I'm going to do my class in Deuteronomy on Google Meet. So there it is. Thank you for listening, and may God continue to bless you in your life. And if you have any questions about the church, I'll leave the information on how to find us on the web. Thank you.